My name is Madeline Taylor. I just turned 26, and a week ago, I officially graduated with a law degree from the University of Michigan, ranking near the top of my class with an honors diploma I once believed I might never reach. The ceremony was held at Hill Auditorium, the largest hall on campus, where the towering ceilings and golden lights shining down on polished wooden rows created the solemnity of a Supreme Court hearing. That day, the hall was packed. People clapped and cheered, children called out for their mothers beneath the swell of music, fresh flowers bloomed everywhere, cameras clicked nonstop, tearful hugs were shared, and joy was palpable in every corner. Every name called from the microphone carried a story, and behind every story stood a family, present to witness and celebrate it. Except mine. My name was called near the end of the ceremony. Madeline Rose Taylor, Juris Doctor, University of Michigan, magna cum laude. I rose from the third row and walked with steady, deliberate steps in a deep navy blue gown and a slightly tilted mortarboard, my softly curled hair pinned neatly at the nape of my neck. I offered a poised smile as I shook the dean's hand, accepted the diploma scroll, and bowed respectfully. Applause followed, not too loud, not too faint, but to me, the entire scene narrowed to one detail alone. 5 empty seats in the VIP section, front row, right side of the stage. Each chair bore a small name card. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor. Alyssa Taylor, and 2 labeled, reserved. I had booked those seats 2 months in advance, paid extra to place them close to the stage where every expression would be lit clearly, where I could glance down and catch a smile from my father, a proud gaze from my mother, or, at the very least, a nod of recognition I'd been yearning for since I was 15, but all I saw was absence. Those lifeless, unoccupied chairs whispered one truth to me louder than any applause. Once again, I had crossed the most important threshold of my life alone. I used to believe that when the gates of university opened, life would begin a new chapter, a fairer one. At 18, I received my acceptance letter from the University of Michigan, a prestigious Juris Doctor program I had spent 3 years in high school chasing after. I remember the exact moment I opened that email at 2 in the morning, sitting in front of an old computer with a missing R key, and the words, "Congratulations, you've been admitted," appeared under a pale blue glow. I cried. Not out of surprise, but relief. For the first time, I felt like I was good enough to step into the world I had only dared to admire from behind a glass window. I printed that letter, taped it to the fridge, and called my parents, unable to contain my excitement. But the first response from my father after a long pause was, "What's the point of a girl studying law? Who's going to hire you? Courtrooms are full of men." My mother gave a dismissive chuckle. "Why not go into medicine? That's still a stable profession. Or at least study marketing or PR, like Emily's friend, it's easier to find a job later." I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I'd heard those lines too many times before. In my family, every decision required my parents' approval, and that approval only extended to things they understood or had seen on television. To them, law was a distant world, filled with arguments and battles, and especially unsuited for women. To them, someone like me should pick something light, safe, and marriage-friendly. But I didn't choose what was easy. My younger sister, Alyssa, is 2 years younger than me and has always been known as the baby of the family. Since we were kids, she wore prettier dresses, was allowed to speak louder, and made more mistakes without being scolded. While I was in high school, I cleaned the house and tutored to help my mother pay for gas. Alyssa practiced K-pop dances and filmed TikTok videos. No one ever blamed her. When she decided to pursue media studies at an expensive private college, my parents threw a small celebration at a nearby Italian restaurant, a place I had never been invited to. Even when I received a full-ride scholarship for my freshman year. I still remember, during that dinner, my mother raised her glass and said, "At last, we have a daughter who dares to dream big." I smiled, though my throat felt dry. Because at that moment, I was already a first-year law student, working part-time at a bookstore near my dorm, waking up at 6 every morning to finish reading criminal law chapters before class. A year later, Alyssa dropped out a decision the whole family applauded as if it were a mark of genius that didn't need formal education. She announced that she was going to start a vegan cosmetics brand for young women, a concept I found vague, but to my parents, it was visionary. Not long after, my father withdrew nearly $30,000 from the family savings fund to help her start the business. Because she dares to dream, he said. I asked quietly, what about me? My father turned to me, frowning. You chose law, then figure it out yourself. And I did. I took on everything I could, waiting tables, shelving books in the library, assisting in a local law office. I ate instant noodles at the end of the month, got haircuts at discount salons, and sewed up the torn seams of my shirts by hand. There was a time I had to request a 1-week delay in rent because my paycheck hadn't come through yet. But I never told anyone. I only spoke up when there were accomplishments, being selected for a special legal research team, earning a scholarship from the Alumni Association, being invited by a professor to co-author a paper for a law journal. Every time I called home to share these things with my parents, their response was muted. My mother often interrupted, "That's good, but your sister just got invited to a morning television interview today. She's promoting her new lipstick line, very professional." I grew used to the fact that my achievements were never enough to make them proud or even interested. I also slowly learned not to expect anything. But not expecting doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Sitting in classrooms, learning about civil rights, anti-discrimination laws, and the idea that justice must be blind, I couldn't help but realize that I was living in a family where justice had never been evenly given. I studied law not just because I believed in justice, but because deep down, I hoped that if I went far enough, climbed high enough, they wouldn't be able to ignore me anymore. But the truth is, some people aren't blind, they just choose not to see. And some people aren't deaf, they just think my sister speaks louder. My second year passed in a long silence from the people closest to me. I started the new semester by applying for an internship at the U.S. Attorney's office in Detroit, one of the most competitive placements in the region. I expected nothing but a polite rejection, but after 3 intense interviews and a detailed written test, I received an offer. It was the first time I saw my name printed on a government envelope bearing the words, United States Attorney's Office. I remember sitting quietly outside my dorm, opening the letter with trembling hands. I had done it. I had stepped into a world that, once upon a time, only rich kids from private schools and children of attorneys ever imagined entering. On my first day as an intern, I wore an old blazer I had bought from a second-hand shop and arrived 45 minutes early. I learned how to organize case files, how to draft investigative reports, and how to outline a criminal case before it went to trial. I quietly observed the prosecutors, the way they presented evidence, read the expressions of jurors, and struck the wooden desk at just the right moment to emphasize a point. Every day there felt like a living classroom, except you weren't allowed to make mistakes. In the mornings, I studied in lecture halls. In the afternoons, I reported to the U.S. Attorney's Office. At night, I worked as a waitress at a pizza shop to cover my rent. And in the late hours, I sat up reading case law until 2 a.m., sipping coffee and fighting to stay awake. Sometimes I was so exhausted I'd fall asleep at my desk, my chin resting on the edge of a book, waking up only when the sun had begun to rise. While I was living each day as if balancing on a tightrope, my sister Alyssa seemed to be flying. Her TikTok account exploded, skyrocketing from a few tens of thousands of followers to 200,000 in less than 6 months. The local media dubbed her the Midwest Beauty Queen, with videos on makeup tutorials, how to shine on the street, and vibrant live streams from product launch events of the brand my parents had funded. One time, I walked past a convenience store near campus and saw her face printed on the packaging of a newly released lipstick line, and just below it, the logo, Taylor Beauty. I stood frozen for a moment, not out of jealousy, but because I realized they had helped her build an empire. While I still had to quietly bring home leftover sandwiches from my part-time job for dinner. I didn't blame Alyssa, I blamed the feeling of being forgotten. My parents didn't hide their pride. They often sent her videos into the family group chat with captions like, "Your sister's pitching on Shark Tank." Say a prayer, maybe we'll be on television soon. I read those messages on nights I sat by the fifth-floor dorm window, typing up my thesis while the distant sound of ambulance sirens echoed through the dark. No one ever asked, "How are you today?" No one knew I once had to call the campus mental health support line because there were nights I cried and didn't know why. I never called home. I only emailed my academic advisor or texted classmates, the only people who knew I still existed. The turning point came in the summer of my third year when I was accepted into the Harvard Law Summer Program, an elite course that admits only 1% of law students nationwide. The invitation landed in my inbox, along with a housing stipend. I jumped for joy, ran into the dorm hallway, and called home. "Mom," I practically shouted into the phone, "I got into Harvard." My mother paused for a few seconds, then said, "Don't exaggerate, it's just summer school. No one cares. By the way, your sister just landed her first contract. She's opening a kiosk at the mall near home." I wanted to say it wasn't just summer school. It was a serious internship led by a tenured Harvard law professor. I wanted to explain that only 30 students were chosen out of thousands of applicants. But I kept quiet. Because I knew no one would listen. I quietly closed my laptop, folded the letter, and simply emailed the program my acceptance. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't tell anyone but my roommate, who hugged me in our tiny kitchen and said, "You deserve this. They don't see it, but we do." After that summer, I began falling into depression. Not severe, at least, that's what I told myself. But I had trouble sleeping. I started declining invitations from friends. I ate less. I would sit still for hours, staring at emails without reading them, typing paragraphs I couldn't remember writing. I didn't have time to fall apart, but I began to feel like I was living as a shadow. A shadow that kept moving, kept achieving, but grew dimmer even in its own eyes. I smiled out of politeness. I clapped out of habit. I didn't cry because I feared it made me weak. And I didn't tell my family because I had come to understand this. Some pain becomes lighter when shared, but some pain becomes ridiculous when it falls into ears that don't care. I kept walking, on aching feet and with a heart full of cuts. Because throughout the 7 years I spent chasing my dream of becoming a lawyer, even when there was no applause behind me, I had to keep going. Because if I stopped, no one would be there to pick me up. And maybe, just maybe, that very loneliness, the kind that hollows you out, was what forged me. Not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice. Graduation day arrived on a soft May morning. Late-blooming cherry blossoms still dotted the path leading to Hill Auditorium, the place that once felt like a distant dream when I was 18, and had now become a clearly drawn finish line. I had sent the invitations out in early March, down to the smallest detail. Typed out my parents' names, Mark and Diane Taylor, my sister Alyssa's, and added a note that read, "Reserved seating for immediate family, row 1, seats a 1 to a 5. I even included a layout of the hall, highlighted the arrival time, and suggested the nearest parking options. I reserved 5 VIP seats at a high price, hand-wrapped 3 bouquets of white hydrangeas, the flower my mother once said was graceful and understated, never showy. I pictured her standing up to take a photo when my name was called, my father giving a subtle nod that meant, "You did well," Alyssa half-scrolling through TikTok but secretly recording the moment her sister received her degree. I still hoped, though the hope was paper-thin. Because even though I had walked alone for so many years, a part of me still longed for recognition, not from professors, not from colleagues, but from the people I once called family. That morning, I wore a simple black dress beneath the deep navy graduation robe. My lightly curled hair was neatly styled, cheeks brushed just enough, lips painted in muted brick red just enough, not to fade among hundreds of other graduates. I arrived 45 minutes early, checked the seats I had reserved for my family, and watched the staff carefully attach name tags to each chair. I didn't call to remind anyone. I believed that if they intended to come, they already knew what to do. I stepped backstage, where other students were hugging, adjusting their caps, rehearsing speeches, and discussing dinner plans. Many had parents beside them, partners waiting at the gate, some even hired photographers to capture every moment. When my name echoed through the list of graduates, Madeline Rose Taylor, magna cum laude, I walked onto the stage. My steps were steady, but my heart seemed to shrink with every beat. The spotlight made me squint, not from brightness, but because I was straining to find the front row. Seats A1 to A5 were still empty. The name cards were still there, no flowers. No familiar faces taking their seats, no distinct applause calling out to me in a voice I knew. Only the generic clapping of a polite audience observing ceremony. And me, bowing silently, accepting the diploma, smiling without a sound. After the ceremony, my friends rushed out, throwing themselves into hugs with their families, posing for pictures with their parents, holding flowers, opening gifts, laughing without restraint. Some introduced their partners, some cried from joy, some called their grandparents over FaceTime. I stepped back, stood alone at the edge of the lawn, holding the diploma rolled in its red ribbon, one hand gripping my cap, the other holding a forced smile. I asked a classmate to take a picture for me. I stood in front of the campus gate, diploma in hand, behind me the banner. Congratulations, class of 2025. I thought about sending that photo to the family group chat, but then I didn't. Instead, I sent a thank you email to my academic advisor, the one who had patiently edited every draft of my thesis, who had pointed out every flawed argument over the past 3 years. I texted my roommate, the one who stayed up with me until 3 in the morning before exams, brewed coffee, and listened to me mutter case law like someone losing their mind. I handwrote a thank you card to the cafe manager at my part-time job, the one who let me adjust my shifts when my class schedule changed, who handed me a cappuccino on the house at the end of every month when I lied and said, "I'm full already." I wrote all those words of gratitude with absolute sincerity. But I sent nothing home, not out of anger. I'm not angry with them, I just no longer believe. I stood alone for a long time after the ceremony, watching the chairs being packed away, the campus slowly emptying out, with only a few balloons drifting, stuck in the trees. I opened my phone and saw Alyssa had just posted on Instagram a grand product launch event in Austin, happening on the same day as my graduation. There she was, on stage under bright lights, wearing a sequin dress, holding up her latest product, with a caption underneath. "Thank you to my parents for always believing in and investing in me. Taylor Beauty now officially available in 12 states across the US." The post had thousands of likes. I saw my mother's comment beneath it. "So proud of my baby girl." I cried already. I let out a dry laugh, soundless. There were no comments about me, no words for me at all. I turned and walked away from the auditorium, step by step on the red brick path I used to dream someone would walk beside me on. But today, I walked alone. No one sent me off, no one asked what I planned to do next, no one captured the moment I reached my dream. I opened the car door, carefully laid the diploma across the back seat, took off my shoes, and leaned my head against the driver's seat. No tears, no drama. Just a quiet realization. Some sadness doesn't need witnesses to be real. Some absences echo louder than 100 spoken words. And in that moment, I stopped hoping. Not because I was disappointed, but because I had grown used to it. Their silence no longer hurt me. It only made me quiet too. No resentment, no bitterness. Just a cold clarity. If love has to be begged for, maybe it was never really there. A week after the graduation, on a drizzly Thursday afternoon, I sat alone in my small apartment near downtown, surrounded by half-packed boxes, half-folded clothes, and piles of books. I was preparing to move, starting my first job as a legal intern at a major firm in downtown Detroit. Everything unfolded quietly. No farewell party, no congratulations from family. Just a few texts from classmates, a few calls from professors and my old manager. In my mind, graduation was over, and with it, I thought I had finally closed the chapter of craving recognition from those I called family. But then the article appeared. I didn't even know about it until my advisor handed me a printed copy, tucked inside a thick yellow envelope. Detroit Tribune. This year's bar exam. Top 5 graduates and their stories of triumph. Page 3, bottom right corner, there was my photo in my deep navy cap and gown, looking straight into the camera, and below it, the headline in bold black ink. First, generation immigrant daughter cracks top of bar exam. I climbed the stairs alone. The article told my story, from a waitress in Ann Arbor to the girl no one showed up for on graduation day, to passing in the top 10 of the Michigan bar exam, and receiving an offer from a prestigious law firm. It even quoted me. I used to think that if I became good enough, maybe someone would notice, but then I realized no one needs to notice. I can still stand. I didn't post the article on social media. I didn't send it to the family group chat. I didn't call home to share the news. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to keep something for myself. This success, however, small, was the product of 7 years of silence, endurance, and labor without a single word of praise. I owed no one the right to share it. But what I didn't expect was that someone else had already sent the article home. That afternoon, the sky opened up. Summer rain in Michigan doesn't roar, but it falls just enough to soak your shoulders and stretch your shadow beneath the eaves. I was sorting through books when I heard a knock. Not urgent, not sharp, just a slow, hesitant knock. I opened the door. Standing in front of me was my father, Mark Taylor, a man I hadn't seen in nearly a year. His coat was soaked, the brim of his baseball cap dripping, and in his hand was a newspaper folded in quarters. His face showed no expression, but there was something unfamiliar in his eyes, like he didn't know where to begin. "Hi, kid," he said, then looked down at the paper and raised it slightly. "Why didn't you tell us?" I didn't answer right away. I just stepped back slightly, enough so I wasn't hidden behind the door, and crossed my arms. I nodded toward the paper in his hand and said calmly, "Read the headline." He slowly unfolded it. I could see every small shift in his expression, the slight furrow of his brows, the tight line of his mouth. His eyes stopped at the bolded title, then dropped to my photo. When he reached the quote, I saw his shoulders falter. "I climbed the stairs alone," he read softly, like he was trying to swallow each word. "And it wasn't just the graduation, Dad," I said, my voice beginning to crack. "It was all 7 years. Not a single check-in. Not a single moment. You weren't there, not just that day, but every day I needed you." I didn't cry, but my eyes stung. Not out of blame. Just because I had held that sentence in for far too long. He didn't respond. Just lowered his head. The newspaper in his hands crumpled slightly, the old fold slipping out of alignment. Rain tapped on the roof above us, filling the silence like a ticking clock. I saw him swallow, then finally say, I didn't think it was like that. We didn't know how to. I'm proud of you, Maddie. I really am." I looked him in the eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't look away. I didn't try to soften. I didn't wait for him to make it right. "Then don't expect a front row seat at the bar ceremony," I said. My voice wasn't loud, wasn't cold, just firm enough to end any thought of stepping back into my life without coming through the front door. He didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't apologize. He just stood there, like a child caught doing something wrong. His face loosened, and for the first time, I saw real exhaustion in the eyes of a man who once thought he was always right. We stood there, across a narrow doorway, one of us who had stepped out of a dream their parents once had, the other realizing that dream had never truly included the real image of his daughter. I didn't invite him in. But I didn't close the door, either. I just stood there, keeping distance, not close enough to forgive, but not far enough to hate. I turned away to answer the phone ringing on the kitchen counter. A call from the law firm I'd be joining. I picked up, voice steady. "Yes, I'll be there Monday morning. Thank you." When I turned back to the door, he was still standing there, but his shoulders had slumped a little more. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but didn't. And in that moment, I understood he hadn't come to argue. He hadn't come to make amends. He had come to see if the daughter he once knew might still have a soft spot left to reach. But that girl didn't live here anymore. The next day remained overcast. The rain had stopped, but droplets still clung to the windowsill, catching the pale light of a late morning. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in a long time, one I thought I'd muted in my heart long ago. Alyssa. My sister. Alongside it was a pink heart and emoji she had added herself back when we were still in high school and used to call each other super sisters. I hesitated for a few seconds, mug still in hand, then picked up. He. Her voice rang out, bright and deliberately cheerful. Maddie, I just read the article. Oh my God. Why didn't you tell anyone? I had to find out from someone else, can you believe that? Anyway, congrats, seriously, that's amazing. I smiled faintly, a kind of smile that didn't touch my eyes. Thanks, I replied briefly. I saw the photo too. You looked so classy in your gown. Oh, and… She paused for half a second, then her tone shifted, dropping into something more practical, more transactional. Do you have a minute? I need a quick favor. Something came up with my brand. A copyright dispute over the logo. I hired a lawyer, but he's honestly useless. He keeps letting the other side lead the conversation. I was thinking, maybe you could give me some advice? Not a lot. Just a few tips. I mean, you're a lawyer now, right? I set the mug down and looked out the window where a streak of water ran down the glass, like a silent question mark. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then exhaled slowly. I'm not your cleanup crew, Alyssa, I said, my voice low but steady. She sounded caught off guard. What? Cleanup crew? I just thought you could help, that's all. When I needed a seat filled just one person to be there when I crossed the biggest milestone of my life, I didn't see anyone, I cut in. But now that your brand is in trouble, suddenly I'm back in your contacts. Alyssa gave a nervous chuckle. Well, I was just really busy, okay? And you know how mom and dad are. They don't really care about all that ceremony stuff. No, they care. Just not when it's about me. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her exhale and even feel the discomfort starting to thicken through the line. Then she spoke again, her voice tinged with frustration. You always think I'm the one who got everything, don't you? That I was the favorite. But I had pressure too, Maddie. I was the one they placed expectations on. You were the independent one. Everyone thought you had it all together, so no one worried about you. But me? Every time I failed, I was told I was a disappointment. You think that's easy? I let out a soft laugh. If you got called a disappointment when you made mistakes, then I never even had the right to make one. I did everything right. Not to outshine you. But because I used to believe that if I was perfect, maybe they'd finally see me. But you're right, you were the expectation. I was just the one expected to survive. I hung up after that, not out of anger. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I no longer saw any need to keep talking when the purpose of the conversation had been clear from the beginning. It wasn't to ask how I was, it was to ask for something. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again. This time it was a message from my mother. Alyssa needs you. Family is about helping each other. I stared at the words, reading them over and over. Each word familiar, each argument worn thin, repeated like some ancient hymn as if kinship alone were reason enough to erase all the times I'd been left behind. As if helping was an obligation, even when being present had never been theirs. I typed a few words. Not long. No justification. Just one sentence. Family is also where people should show up, especially when I need them. And I hit send. Expecting no reply, feeling no need to explain. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for drawing a line. Didn't feel selfish for protecting my boundaries. Because when someone only reaches for you when they need something, not when you do, that's not kinship. That's a transaction. And I was no longer the one paying the cost. I didn't expect her to come. Part of me assumed my mother would default to the usual pattern: another call, another text, or worse, a message passed through Alyssa. But that afternoon, as the last streaks of sunlight slipped across the porch steps, I heard a knock, soft, hesitant. I stepped out, and she was there. My mother, Diane Taylor, neat in a pale cream sweater, her hair tied back, no makeup but clearly prepared. In her hands, a thick craft envelope, held close to her chest as if afraid it might break. She didn't look at me right away. Her gaze skimmed past the doorframe, across the porch, as though debating whether to turn around. "I didn't make an appointment," she said with a tight smile, the kind she used when bumping into people from church. Polite, distant, a little stiff. "But I figured, if I didn't come in person, you might never speak to me again." I didn't invite her in. But I didn't stop her either. I stepped aside, opening the door, and she walked in like a stranger granted temporary shelter. The apartment was still a mess from packing. Books stacked like towers, belongings scattered, even a box of glassware I hadn't taped shut yet. She looked around, didn't criticize, didn't ask questions, just took it in as if seeing where I lived for the first time, and realizing she knew nothing about it. I stood with my arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. But she didn't rush. "I read the article," she said at last, setting the envelope down on the small wooden table beside the sofa. "I don't know who sent it, maybe your professor, maybe someone at school. But I read it every word. 3 times, and I remembered things." She took a long breath, like she was gathering the nerve to go on. "I went into the storage closet, looked through some of the old paperwork. I kept more than I thought." She nudged the envelope toward me, but I didn't take it, I just looked at it. She noticed, and didn't insist. "There's a photo of you from 6th grade, holding your first-place award for that school essay on justice. There's your scholarship letter from the state of Michigan." I had tucked it into a drawer, thinking I'd frame it someday. But I forgot. "There's also a small card you made me when you were 10, do you remember that? The one with the drawing of the scales, and the words, 'Someday I'll be a lawyer to protect the innocent.' I still have it. But I've forgotten it too many times." I felt something tighten in my chest, not from emotion, but from the pressure of it. All the things I thought were lost, all the things I believed no one cared about, had existed all along. They had simply lived in silence, never acknowledged, never named. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said, her voice steady but noticeably softer. "And I understand if you don't want your father or me to attend your bar ceremony, but I just want you to know, I see you now, I see it all. Not just the girl in the article. I see who you've become, the road you've walked, how many years you kept walking alone, and no one ever stopped to ask if you were tired." I didn't know what to say. For years, I had longed to hear words like that. I had imagined myself crying, maybe throwing my arms around her. But now, all I felt was a quiet blank space inside me. No anger. No hope. I still didn't take the envelope. I wasn't ready. Maybe in a few weeks. Maybe in a few years. She stood up, smoothed the creases in her sweater, her hands folding lightly together. "If there's a spot in the back row," she said, looking me straight in the eye, "I'll be there. I won't ask for more. I won't try to move to the front. I just want to see you walk across with your certificate in hand." I said nothing. I didn't nod. But she understood. She walked to the door, opened it with one hand, and the afternoon light caught the fine new lines on her face. Lines I hadn't noticed the last time I really looked. Before she closed the door, she turned back. "Whether you let me in or not, I'll be there. Not to be seen, but to prove to myself that I didn't miss it again." When the door closed, I stood there for a long time. Then I sat down, looking at the envelope still resting on the table. I reached out, touched the edge of the paper gently, but didn't open it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed time. Time to tell the difference between genuine remorse and one last attempt to play the role of the mother who meant well. I didn't know if she truly understood, but at the very least, this time, she showed up. Not to demand. Not to ask for anything. But to lay down pieces of memory I once thought only I had held on to. And to me, that was perhaps the first apology she had ever given, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. The bar ceremony took place on a clear June morning, the sky a crisp blue as if the storms from the week before had never existed. I woke up earlier than usual, not from nerves, but from a quiet need to settle myself before stepping into the final moment of a 7-year journey. I chose a simple black suit. Well-fitted, with clean seams, tight cuffs, and sharp shoulders like a refined suit of armor. No jewelry, no standout colors. Just me and everything I had become. No more graduation gowns, no more caps. Today, I didn't come to be celebrated, I came to affirm who I am. The venue wasn't as grand as Hill Auditorium, but it had its own solemn grace. Neatly lined rows of seats, warm golden light from vintage chandeliers, and above the stage, carved into wood, the words, Michigan State Bar, Oath of Office. There were no flowers, no thunderous applause. Everything was still, everything dignified, just like the profession we had chosen. No need for extravagance, only steadiness and precision. I sat in the third row, among the familiar faces of my law cohort. Everyone was in suits and long dresses, serious, composed, quietly proud, but none of us spoke much. Because today wasn't about celebration. It was the day we stepped into a new role with a vow no one is ever allowed to take lightly. When the MC began calling names for each person to come forward, receive their certificate, and take the oath, I stood when it was my turn and walked slowly to the stage. Applause rose from behind, measured, polite. I didn't turn around, I didn't look for anyone in the crowd, because I had already learned how to walk forward without needing support behind me. I looked straight ahead, shook hands with the representative from the State Bar Council, accepted my certificate, and listened to the reminder. Remember, the law is not just a tool, it's a responsibility. I nodded and replied, I understand. No embellishment, just acknowledgement. But as I stepped down from the platform and turned to leave the stage, my eyes instinctively swept toward the back of the hall, and there they were. My parents. Standing at the very last row, where the lights didn't reach, where no one jostled for a photo. No bouquet in their hands, no proud poster, no loud cheers or wide smiles, just presence quiet and still. My mother leaned slightly forward, hands clasped together. My father stood beside her, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly slumped. The way they looked at me, it wasn't as though they were seeing a shining success. It was as if, for the first time, they were truly seeing something they finally understood. I couldn't tell if it was regret, pride, or late-blooming remorse, but it was real. And for the first time, I didn't feel hollow seeing them there. I didn't wave, I didn't smile, I didn't walk toward them. But as I passed through the aisle beside where they stood, I gave a small nod, simple, wordless. Not forgiveness. Not an invitation. Just a way of saying, I see you, and this time, I will remember it. How one. I walked out of the hall alone. No one followed, no one called after me. But, unlike graduation, this time I didn't feel alone. I stood outside, breathing deeply. The smell of freshly cut grass, the press of newly ironed fabric, the touch of June wind brushing past my sleeve. I looked down at the certificate in my hand and saw my name in bold print, Madeline Rose Taylor, attorney at law. I read it again silently, not to show anyone. Just to affirm to myself that I had made it. No one carried me, no one led me. And no one could take that away. Behind me, the ceremony slowly dissolved. Families gathered for photos, friends hugged, laughter scattered across the air. I didn't turn back. I walked toward the parking lot, still holding the certificate tightly. I didn't feel light, I didn't feel heavy. Just a quiet, grounded stillness like the final brick placed in a house I had built on my own, in silence. That day, I didn't go straight home. I stopped by a small park near downtown, sat on the same wooden bench I used to collapse onto after long evening shifts during my student years back when I was so tired I wondered if anyone even remembered I existed. I sat still for a long time, hands resting on my lap, eyes watching strangers pass by. And for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow. I wasn't thinking about expectations. I wasn't thinking about what was missing. I just thought, this moment is mine. And I sat there. Not rushing, not needing applause, not needing anyone to see it. But this time I didn't need anything more. I once believed that if I did everything right, if I earned straight, as if I won the prestigious scholarships, if I passed the bar on my first try, then maybe, just maybe, they would love me the way they loved my sister. I used to believe that a parent's love could be earned with achievement. That if I worked hard enough, overcame every barrier they refused to acknowledge, one day I'd be worthy of being loved as a real daughter. Not the one who was responsible. Not the shadow who was strong enough to need nothing. But simply as a person who gets tired, who gets sad, who needs someone to pause and ask, "Are you okay?" But I was wrong. There are things you cannot earn with achievements, like presence, understanding, and unconditional love. I had been running for 7 years, on bleeding feet and with a heart clenched so tightly it wouldn't break. I made it through every exam, every sleepless night, every moment of being forgotten, not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice. I kept thinking, if I just pushed a little harder, if I proved myself one more time, maybe the next time they would come. Maybe the next time, they would be proud. Maybe they would call my name, choose me instead of my sister. But there was no next time. And I no longer needed there to be one. I realized that the moment I stepped onto the stage to take my oath, no longer glancing back to search for anyone in the crowd. I realized that I didn't need their approval to affirm my worth. I didn't need the flowers, the congratulations, or the picture-perfect family photo. Because I had written my own story with no borrowed script, no role someone else cast me into. I stepped onto that platform not to be honored, but to say to myself, I made it, even when no one showed me the way. And if you're still reading this, if you've ever been abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love you without condition, know this. You are not alone. And you are not wrong. You are not ungrateful for feeling hurt. You are not selfish for wanting to be understood. You are not weak for needing to be seen. And most of all, you can still become the most extraordinary version of yourself, even if no one is there to clap for you. Because your worth does not lie in how others see you. It lies in the fact that you never gave up on yourself even when the whole world turned away. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again in the next story.